can I ask another question? Who was Obama's audience when he said that Egypt is neither an ally nor an enemy? You have to wonder what the mindset is. I mean, I understand why Obama needs this to be spontaneous, and he needs it to be about a movie or a cartoon or any other distraction, because that, like you said, destroys the narrative that he was going to come in and make us well respected in the Middle East. But I think the biggest indictment here is from the Libyan president himself. It would benefit the Libyan president for this to have been spontaneous. Does him no favors to have an organized terrorist cell in Libya where we are actively helping, revive their government. So the fact that he is putting his people and nation-building efforts on the line to say, yes, this was targeted, this was planned, and we have to have foreign audience for this. To me, is all I need to hear.
I can think of one reason, though, SC, and that is this. If the United States is popular in Libya, pitting the extremist elements in Libya against himself and himself on the side of the American people could theoretically give him a political advantage.
Sure,
explaining that statement, I think
he could easily say, pit himself against radicals who had spontaneously uprisen, instead of coming out on a limb and saying this was organized.
The administration is running scared from what this also tells us, specifically in Libya. The polls you're talking about that show we maybe, let's say it's 60%, let's say it's 70%. You only need 5 or 10% of a population that is heavily armed, organized, and dedicated to jihad to throw a country into total chaos. There's the possibility of Libya, which again was one of the sort of crown jewels of Obama foreign policy here, looking more like Somalia on the Mediterranean.
But it was a crown jewel.
That's a serious consideration here, and I think that that's something that the administration is trying to avoid a recognition of at all costs.
But Buck, it was a crown jewel in part because of people like Susan Rice, who approached it with exactly the kind of
She was the mind behind the whole thing.
And so because of that, that's, I think, what's really at risk here. It's the risk of exposing Obama's approach to foreign policy as incoherent, as one that's actually out of touch with what's really happening on the ground.
But I still have to wonder, is there a legitimate foreign policy reason why Susan Rice went on television and said what we can all see? Either they're stupid or they think we are, or they're speaking to someone else.
The war on terror, right? Because if this is not global Islam uniting against the West, and it is radical Islam uniting weak people against a ghost, then they have some explaining to do as to what do we do about this war on terror that Democrats and this president said was a relic of an administration past, and that we now have to focus on a new view of the world. And this view involves an open hand, not a closed fist, and terrorism doesn't exist anymore.
That's the fundamental misunderstanding I see them talking about right there. This administration thinks that that this has changed, and that Bush, I think they actually believe that Bush's policies created jihad.
Of course,
it's a complete lack of understanding of history.
It is the war on terror.
Let me put the map up that we hinted at just a little bit earlier that shows where these protests are breaking out across the world, because now both Ben and SC have indicted Barack Obama's foreign policy beyond just the concept of being the ambassador of goodwill, beyond just improving the United States in the eyes of the Middle East, but actually taking this, as you said, hands-off approach. Instead of being the stick that stirs the coffee, playing out hands-off. Let's see what happens in these countries. The slow approach in Syria and so forth. You can see there's protests from Morocco to Southeast Asia. It's not reflecting well on foreign policy in general.
But there was so much in her statement that was absolutely insulting to the American people who have been watching this unfold. When she said that we had adequate security in Benghazi because 2 of the 4 who were killed were Marines?
Disconnected from reality.
This is like saying you have a great security system because the robbers came in and murdered you all.
But they really do think that this is they really do think that this is a popularity contest. And that's what I think is really concerning about this whole thing. They're approaching it from the perspective of, well, if we just shut the door on this, we've got to move on. We have to move on to the next thing. We can't pretend like this is bigger than it is. But from our perspective, I think that they're just not acknowledging the truth of how big this really could be.
But Ben, can you put up with a U.S. government official going on your news to tell you that security in Benghazi was adequate because 2 of the 4 who were murdered were Marines? This is
Amy,
like Alice in Wonderland.
It was a shockingly dumb thing to say.
That's a very plausible
thing to say.
Third potential reason why they're holding fast to this explanation, because the security in place for the ambassador was completely lacking. With all of the knowledge and all of the intelligence they had ahead of time. I mean, look, we've said 3, right? The ambassador of goodwill, a failed foreign policy in general, and a complete lack of security in Benghazi.
I want to know, where was Susan Rice for this months-long conversation on Syria. Suddenly she has appeared and is on all of the shows talking very much at great lengths about Libya. It seems to me they are incredibly, I don't want to say gleeful, but happy for the new storyline to come across the UN desk.
We're supposed to pretend that Libya is great, at least until Election Day.